welcome all of you. Thanks for coming to our H2H8 panel on academic career. I'm going to be starting the panel, and then Professor Professor Lu will talk about the experience, and also Dr. Mirabito will also talk about her postdoc experience, and then we can open up for questions. So if you have any questions during the presentation, you can raise your hand. Okay. All right. So a little bit of my background. Why am I doing this? Because my whole career is with academic institutions. So right from college all the way through retirement, I've been working in universities. So I work. My last job was at San Jose State as a professor and also associate dean. And before that, I have various jobs, both administrative and teaching, and so on. So that was at San Jose State. I retired about 8 years ago. I'm still active in the community. So I was also related to Berkeley. I was a visiting scholar at the Haas School during my sabbatical. So after I got tenure, we were allowed to have a year of sabbatical. Actually, one semester, but I stretched it to 1 year. So I spent 1 year at Haas and working with some of the faculty there, and I was able to do some research. And one of my co-author actually was somebody at LBL. So I have an LBL co-author and also a Haas co-author. So it was a very enjoyable experience. I really enjoyed, being on campus and working with people. So prior to coming to San Jose State, I worked at Northeastern University in Boston. I also started at Boston University. When I started Boston University, I didn't even have my PhD yet. So I was ABD, all but dissertation, and then I do a couple of years and then moved to Northeastern and then come back to the West Coast. Prior to that, I went to school at UCLA to get my doctorate. And I was teaching there, doing some classes and also research assistant. At Oregon, I did my bachelor and master in computer science. When I started teaching, when I was a junior in college, I was given a chance to teach a class. I really loved it. Later on, doing my graduate studies, I had a graduate teaching fellowship. So they pay for my tuition and I have to teach 2 classes per quarter. So that was my my trade-off, and I really enjoy teaching. Grants wise, I had NSF grants, and I also have a NIST, which is National Institute for Standard and Technology grant. I also did a lot of work working in industry, so I have a few IBM faculty awards. They were given to faculty not on a contract basis, but on a discretionary basis. That means you can use it for travel and things like that. So since I'm from the business schools, I have a lot of contacts with different companies and also labs and also government agencies. So I did a lot of consulting also. So that's kind of my background. Professor Booth, here is his slide. So I will, say a few words now, and then later on when I switch to both of you to the speakers, I will have this slide again so you can elaborate more on your own experience. Okay, so this is just an introduction. Some of you know him. He's associate professor of the Department of Earth and Planetary Science at Berkeley. Very good supporter of us, and so I would like to have him later on talk about his experience. And you can see that he also have worked with a lot of grants. Yeah. And then, of course, Professor Lu, astronomy and associate professor and chair of the astronomy department. As I said before, I really like the background, the slides are very beautiful. And again, she will have the chance to talk a little bit more about herself. I'm very happy that both of you agree to come and talk to us. And let me see, the next person is Yakira Mirabito, doctor, and she's now at MIT as a postdoc. Again, she graduates. She's one of our H2H8 explorers, and she graduated in 2024. And I will she'll be given a chance to talk about her own experience. Okay, so let me get started and talk a little bit about my own experience, and also in not just my own experience, but in general, what an academic position looks like. So academic position in universities depends on the environment. So I have taught in private and both private and public universities. They are quite different. Depends. They set the in private university they set their own rules. Okay, but in public universities like in the UC system and I taught at CSU system, California State University, the rules are quite different in a public university because there is the government involved. I also work in a job that is unionized. Northeastern University was unionized, and also San Jose State is unionized. So there are different constraints about the rules that they have to follow in working in that environment. BU has no union. They're trying to unionize and was not successful at that time. So again, quite different in terms of governance and in terms of how faculty are treated and how they're evaluated and so on. Large versus small. BU was very small. Northeastern was medium sized, and San Jose State was very big. So again, the different types of environment treat you treat differently, and your work environment is quite different. Different type of position, tenure. If you're already tenured, okay, you got a lifetime job. Tenure track is most likely our explorers going into tenure track. Track means that you're given a period of time to achieve tenure based on various types of evaluation. Usually 6 years. You evaluate at the end of I believe the 5th or 6th year, depends on the rules. And then if you got tenure, you stay. If not, then a lot of universities give you 1 extra year to find a transition. So okay, and you can shorten the tenure track if you have a good record. People have adjunct professors that do only teaching, and sometimes they're called clinical professors too. So they're like at Stanford, there are quite a few adjunct and clinical professors that actually do a lot of the teaching work. Different institutions, different orientation for research institutions. They are called research institutes because of their funding level. So for example, usually research institutions are doctoral granting. They have numbers, they have a designation called R1, R2, and so on. R1 is the highest level, like Berkeley is R1, Research 1 University. San Jose State is R2, which is Research 2 plus other things, and so on. Other institutions that are teaching, you have 4-year comprehensive. That means they only give 4-year degrees and master degrees. Some research involved, maybe I put the parenthesis around doctoral programs. So there are some 4-year institutions that are teaching, but also allowed to grant PhDs. So for example, San Jose State actually allowed to grant PhDs in education and also in some of the engineering discipline in cooperation with another university. Okay, so there is quite a difference about the structure of the different institutes. So for example, the classification is done by Carnegie. So they have the Carnegie classification of higher ed. So R1, R2 is all based on this scale. The new one just came out, so you can look at do a search and you can look at what it looks like, what it constitutes, size of the institution, program mix, and at what level focused. So for example, Berkeley is R1. Right. So you're all familiar with Berkeley. Okay, Berkeley is R1 because it has $1 billion of research funding, and 840 doctoral students. So they have low access, what means difficult to get in. Outcome is that you can have higher paying jobs when you get out. So that's R1 Berkeley. So you can compare in your future jobs, you can look this up and look at the institution that you're going to see what type of institution it is. Next thing to talk about is, what does an academic job involve? 3 things: teaching, research, and service. Okay, and that's a picture of my ivory tower. And those are usually the three things that they evaluate on. So you have to have an excellent in teaching. So that's your basic job, basic function of a teacher of a professor is teach. You got to teach your students. You got to do it well. Service is a small part of your duties, and you have the sufficient service. That means the chair and the dean allocate certain service jobs to you, like serving on committees, helping students, sitting on dissertation committees, and guiding students in work, running labs and things like that. And of course, research. Research usually the eval is either outstanding or reputation, whether you have international reputation. And I put down quote publish or perish. It just is true because in most institutions, even teaching institution, if you don't do your research well, you don't get tenure. So it is definitely true, the publish or perish. People might ask, what's the volume of publication? It all depends on the institution. Research institution versus teaching institution also depends on the discipline. For example, some discipline have many, many authors in papers. Some discipline only allow small number, more high value that. So it depends on the discipline, depends on the committee, depends on the rules that you have to follow, the policies and things like that. Okay. Next thing I talk about academic workload. Okay, so being a professor and working, usually I'm using the 2 semester model here. You can have 3 quarters. I think there are less and less quarter-based universities. I think they all switched to, most of them switched to semester-based. So your work is divided into chunks, 10% each. So the fall, you have 5 things that you need to do that constitute 50% of your workload, of your salary. And spring, you got another 50%. Okay, so academic year is 9 months. Okay, and it's not 12 months, 9 months, and it pays your salary 100%. Okay, so and then in summer, you can have a different arrangement in the summer. I didn't put down percentage there because it depends on you and your discipline. You can have various things that you do and to fill up your summer, and then you have to make arrangement if your institution and so on, then department. So for example, in research institution, we usually call that a 2-2 teaching load. That means each semester you teach 2 classes. That means 2 out of 5. You can look at it as is 2 things out of 5. That's why it's called 2. And then the next semester you also 2. And then there are 2 research, 20% of you doing research, and of course there are a certain percentage go to service. That's called 2-2 teaching load, common in research institutions. In teaching institutions, that's usually called a 3-3 teaching load. You teach 3 classes, do 1 research and do 1 service. That's why the research requirement and evaluation for research and teaching institutions is much lower than, let's say, a research institution. So you think about when you go look for a job, this is a research institute, teaching institute, what is the teaching load? Is it a 2-2 or is it a 3-3? Is there a 4-4 teaching load? Yes. There are adjunct professors and clinical professors that have no research requirement and they teach 4 classes or less. All right. And of course, they are paid extra 10% for performing service. Next item here is that what do we do with all those teaching loads? So for example, if you're in a research institute or actually in a teaching institution, you can buy off. All right, you can say, I have research funding, I can teach less. So those teaching loads can be bought off with what they call replacement rate. That means how much does it cost to find a replacement, somebody who is not a full professor who can teach the class for you, an adjunct professor to teach the class for you so that you can go out and do the research. But you have to pay for it. That means it's called bought off. You can bring in research grants to do the buy off. Or there are other types of buy off, research grant of chair. Department chair has buy off to do more service. Professorship, outside people, grant, outside people can pay for more, pay for that position and say, hey, there are alums that have named the professors. So for example, when I was at San Jose State, I had one of those um, endowed professorships, and so it pays for some of this stuff. It was come from an alum. There are administrative duties. There are contracts you can, at least in the business school that I'm familiar with, we can have contracts with outside folks. For example, IBM has provided contracts with universities is pay for work for pay. And they sign non-disclosure agreements. It's a contract for work. You can use part of that to buy off your teaching and do that type of work with the permission from the university, of course. Okay. What about research grants? Okay, of course, we're familiar with NSF, NIH, different foundations, government departments and labs, LBL, the other national lab. Business can buy off with research grants. So there are, for example, I know a business here and other places that actually provide grants to professors to do the research for them. They are called termed professorships. Okay, term means it will last 2 years, 1 year. It's some money they can use. Of course, the result is work for hire, so it's a contract, so it goes back to the company. It's not for public. You can use the money for PI for your principal investigator compensation. Summer pay. Summer pay is important, so you can have contracts that pay summer pay. You can pay for students, which many of you are part of that. Senior researchers, other people that you can bring into the grant. So my own experience is I've been a PI and I also been a senior researcher after I retired. So I'm no longer a employee of the university, but I was involved in an NSF grant. So they hire me as a senior researcher. So I did the work and pay the same, but whatever is different name. You can buy lab equipment, travel. I use a lot of my grants for travel and for food, for buying food, for receptions and so on. Administrative, there's the last part right here is still up in the air, the so-called overhead indirect costs. It used to be very high for NSF and other agencies. It can go up to 60 or even a higher percent, 50%, 55, sometimes 35 if the research is done outside the lab and in other environments. Right now, I think the government is setting a limit to 15%. I put a question mark there because it's not policy yet. It's rumored to be the policy in the near future. So that's the part that the university makes on top of what the other people are doing. Okay. And then the next part right here is that you can have, other than your 5 things that you do, you can also make extra comp. Extra comp, you can make arrangement with university to get extra compensation. Sometimes the certain university allows professors to make up to 50% of their salary from outside sources. Other universities, 100% or even higher. For example, Stanford professors allowed to make extra comp up to 100% of the salary. That means whatever salary they have, that's on paper, but they can make another 100% of that based on grants and consulting and other things. But if you do that type of arrangement, going through university, of course, they take the overhead percentage too. So there is a reason. So if you look at this picture here, professors do research, could be funded, not funded. They do teaching or do more research. They have to do service. I don't think you can buy off service, and you can make arrangements for extra compensation. So in reality, if you do things right, if you set things up right, the compensation is actually not too bad if you can get the grants and do other things with it. Okay. So I think that's my own experience. So are there any questions before we move to the other professors and look at their experience? So by the way, I can't see hands, so anybody can see hands. Okay. So let's ask Professor Booth to talk about your own experience. So I have the slide in front of you. You can talk about your own experience. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me here. Yeah, I think I'm definitely much more of a academic background in many ways in terms of my research field, meaning people in my field tend to have fairly few connections with companies. Uh, First, a little bit of background about myself. After getting my undergraduate degrees at SUNY Binghamton, I worked for a couple of years, and you can see that as that analyst position with the company that is now called Accenture. I then kind of stumbled my way into a master's program at MIT with zero intention of doing a PhD. Liked it so much that I stayed and finished my PhD in January of 2008. Um, I then did a postdoc, a 2-year postdoc at Harvard, and moved to Yale, where I was on the faculty for 7 years before moving to Berkeley, very happily in 2017. Um, uh, like I said, my research isn't really affiliated with any sort of corporate entities. So, my funding has been primarily from government agencies, U.S. federal government agencies, the National Science Foundation, the National Science Foundation is I think a great funder. It's worth talking about that in the current time when we're talking about drastic cuts to the budget of the National Science Foundation. The National Science Foundation is really interested in fundamental research. They want to do discovery. Yes, there is some things you have to put in your grant proposals about broader impacts and how your science will impact society. But it's really a wonderful funding agency in that they want to fund you, they give you the funding, and they want you to do good science. And you have to file annual reports, but you come back at the end of your grant period, and really they just want to see that you did good science. Um, Other federal agencies are a little bit more contract oriented in that they want you to do good science, but they want you to do particular good science, right, on a particular topic, usually with a particular goal. Um, uh, that said, I have worked in those sorts of organizations. A lot of us here at UC Berkeley have close ties to the U.S. Department of Energy because of the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I have an arrangement myself where I'm a faculty scientist at LBNL. That's a 0% time appointment, but it facilitates working relationships with that DOE lab a little more easily than if I didn't have that 0% time appointment. Um, I've also had funding in the past from the Office of Naval Research, which is under the Department of Defense. But ONR is interested. I'm sorry if I didn't say this. I'm an atmospheric scientist. My research is really in the broad field of what we would call geophysical fluid dynamics. So applying, the sort of the applied physics field of fluid dynamics, applying that to the atmosphere, to the ocean a little bit, understanding typically large scale, meaning continental scale, planetary scale flows in the atmosphere and how they uh, set the distribution of wind and water on the surface of Earth. Um, the Office of Naval Research, my connection to them is that they have a fleet of ships that's deployed around the world. They care a lot about weather and climate change. Are their aircraft carriers going to be hit by hurricanes? They want the ability to forecast those better, to understand how the distribution of hurricanes and typhoons will change over time, so they can plan for that. And indeed, my work I had about 5 years of funding with the Office of Naval Research, and it was oriented really around sort of tropical cyclones and extreme weather in the tropics over ocean regions. Um, Much of my work has focused on monsoons, which really are continental scale patterns of wind that deliver water to land in the tropics. I think most people are familiar with, at least maybe by phrase, the Indian monsoon. But every continent in the tropics, Africa, the Americas, even Northern Australia, has a monsoon that brings water to it, almost always in the local summer season. And I put this Indian monsoon mission up there because my research group has actually had funding from the Indian government to work on topics that are really practically relevant to the country of India. So we were sort of taking some of our basic research, our fundamental science research on atmospheric dynamics, and saying, hey, we recognize that this basic research has applications to prediction of extreme events in India over South Asia. So we worked with them to develop some of that predictive technology. Um, uh, More generally, this research area is a topic that lends itself to a fair amount of what we would call climate adaptation work, meaning that as climate changes, or even if climate doesn't change, there's a lot of people around the world, here in the US even with our well-evolved and comparatively rich infrastructure in the US, we are still vulnerable here in California to wildfire. And we have these Diablo and Santa Ana wind events in Florida, hurricanes in the center part of the U.S. to tornadoes and hail and severe thunderstorms. Um, and being able to predict these extreme events on short time scales of an hour or two to days to, say, predict the likelihood of some extreme weather on a time scale of a week to a month, is becoming really a method of adapting our society to live in this variable and changing climate. So increasingly, I'm starting to work, across the tropics with more philanthropic agencies to develop climate adaptation methods, based on some of the fundamental science my group has done for, things like developing better predictions that could be used for weather and climate extremes for agriculture in Africa and South Asia. Um, uh, Maybe I'm happy to just stop there and, take any questions from you, Steve, or others later on, and maybe just turn the floor over to Jessica now.
I have always a question since you're related to Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. There are quite a few graduate students that after they graduate uh, got fellowships from Dow, right? I mean, is there a process that happens? Because I know that they have people dedicated to that, but I don't know how that works.
Actually, Bill, you're saying PhD students who graduate and then have postdoctoral fellowships at
Yes,
LB?
yes.
Okay. The national labs do have good postdoc programs. Usually the postdocs at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, and then even more so at Lawrence Livermore Lab, are paid typically substantially more than postdocs at most or nearly all universities I know of.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
uh, those postdoc positions are certainly not open only to people from UC Berkeley. I think they're globally competitive. They're global competitions. Um, if people from UC Berkeley are more represented, it may just be that they have working relationships with people at LBL or are better known by them just because of the proximity. That's my guess. I don't know a lot about that in detail, though.
Do they have kind of recruiting programs or introductory sessions to talk to students to explore those opportunities?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Uh-huh.
I do know that the labs have a robust internship program that they do a fair amount of advertising for. I'm not sure about the outreach they do about their postdoc programs, though.
Okay. Okay. Maybe the intern program is a way to get into the fellowship program. Okay.
Perhaps. But I would think that anyone globally from any university who applies uh, to the LBL postdoc competitions would be treated based on their merits, right?
Oh, okay. So it's based on the students taking initiative maybe to apply to those programs.
That would be my guess. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So I have a question. So from my own experience that we see a lot more PhD students or graduating from STEM that go into postdoc for a couple of years before they go for tenure track and so on. Is that very common, or is it just certain students have certain aspirations for postdoc?
In my field, it's very common, and I think this is generally true. I mean, Jessica, please chime in. And I think Yakira, I think maybe is a good example of this right now. I think it's almost mandatory to do a postdoc. I think in some fields, my understanding in biology,
Mm.
you typically end up having to do a longer postdoc. Maybe there's just it's a little bit more of a competitive field with more PhDs per faculty position, for example. In my field, it's very common to do a 2-year postdoc before a faculty position. And in my department, we've made a number of offers to students who just graduated or have not even finished their PhD yet. Um, and those faculty candidates or grad students, senior grad students who are getting an offer of a faculty position at Berkeley, they basically always go and they defer accepting the faculty position and they go and they do a 2-year postdoc. Because while you're a grad student, you have to jump through all these hoops, right? You have to take your prelims, you have to take your qualifying exams, you have to do your thesis, you have to defend your thesis, taking classes, you're teaching, being a teaching assistant. And then you're a faculty member and you have to teach and do service and, all this stuff. When you're a postdoc, you have 2 years, normal postdoc in my field is 2 years. You have 2 years, maybe if you have a good postdoc fellowship, it'll be even 3 years. You have uninterrupted research time. And it's just viewed as a really great launch pad for, if you want to maybe pick up some new tools, switch areas a little, or even keep going in your area, but get a bunch of papers out, get some research going, maybe even write a grant proposal or two before you start your faculty position. It's just this great uninterrupted time that you have to just focus only on that. It's almost like you know, if you happen to have a faculty position lined up, which not a lot of people do by the time they start a postdoc, but it's think of it as like if you could be in a faculty position but have a 2-year sabbatical, why would you not do that, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you about the transition. So I transit from, let's say, PhD students to a assistant professor. I was ABD. First year when I was ABD as an assistant professor, I didn't have time to think about research. All those 2-2 teaching load was quite heavy, number one. Actually, it was a 2-2 or 3-1. And also new classes to prepare, right? I mean, those are things, serve on committees, things I've never done before. So look at that model. As a PhD student, I never saw that until I get there. And guess what? School start next week, right? And so I have to jump into that model and then find an apartment and all that other stuff. So you're perfectly right. But for my field, there are not that many postdocs. Just jump right in.
Right,
Thanks for bringing that up. That transition is very. But then also on the transition as being a postdoc. So you can build up your research record, you can get grants and things like that. Will that work count towards, let's say, when you're going up for tenure in a faculty position? Usually they only count the work that you did when you get on to the new jobs. All your previous stuff is just part of your resume. Is that correct?
Um,
Yes.
there's this strict legal accounting, if you will. I do know that when at Berkeley, every time you go up for one of these major promotions, assistant to associate, associate to full professor, and you're supposed to almost draw lines on your publication list of what did you do since a certain point. But all of your work, your whole body of research work over your career really adds to your citations and your reputation and your just so I don't think that I mean I think when you're being evaluated, really there's a large element of that just you're evaluated in what you've done in your lifetime. Uh, More so than someone saying, oh, you did this in the year before you officially started, and we're going to ignore that. And but also, doing good work at any time often informs the next good work. So yeah, it
I
gives
didn't
you a
want to
launch
throw
pad,
in
right?
the term so-called early tenure in the discussion because that's a completely different animal there because of counting again. Yeah. So, Professor Lu, you have something?
Yeah, I think it does matter in the sense that if you discovered something 10 years ago and then you didn't have anything in the last 5 years, I think that would be a pretty large negative. So it does, it's not enough to rest on your laurels. You do have to keep innovating and keep making new discoveries to keep advancing.
Yeah, they call stream of research and not just jumping different places and things like that.
Definitely, yeah.
Hey, Professor
Yeah.
Booth, Berkeley has a fair number of foreign students doing their PhD, right? Without the possibility of getting security clearance, would they be disadvantaged in getting a postdoc position at the Berkeley, at the Lawrence Berkeley Lab or Lawrence Livermore Lab?
I think the national labs, that is an issue. It's a particular issue at Lawrence Livermore Lab, which my understanding is a Lawrence Berkeley Lab does not do classified research. Livermore Lab does do classified research.
Mm.
And so, to have a position at a lab site that has classified research, I think will typically need to have be eligible for some sort of security clearance. Now, I think that there is a facility that Livermore is associated with that is outside the secure border, that is, somewhat new in the grand scheme of things, that some people can work there, but I think, yeah, visa and citizenship status is a criteria at some of the labs, particularly those that do classified research.
I also think that even LBL, the Lawrence Berkeley Lab, you have to be a permanent resident or citizens to go in.
Okay.
Yes, I think so. Because I remember I was asked when I visited.
I
Long
think
time ago.
you can go on campus at Berkeley Labs without those things, but you have to go through extra paperwork.
Okay.
Yeah, and even at Livermore, there are the very secure areas and the slightly less secure areas, and you can, in principle, get, as long as you're ushered around, you can get in
Okay.
for tours or meetings and things like that. And then even on an completely open campus like UC Berkeley, we still have occasional issues if we're working with sensitive hardware that falls under certain protections and restrictions. At those points, sometimes we have to limit access.
That's no different from, the big tech companies. They still need to show and be escorted to meetings and certain places you cannot go to. Very similar. But things might change, right? So, okay. Thank you, Professor Booth. Can we switch to Professor Lu now? Oops. Let me see, where am I?
Okay, as you're switching the slide, so I'll keep mine pretty brief because I think the information on the slide's fairly dry. But I think the interesting bits are that I did not come up with a traditional background. I was actually at a performing arts high school and very much into dance. And so it was quite a big jump to MIT for undergrad after that. And then I worked as a software engineer, similar to William, actually. I worked as a software engineer for a few years before going back to graduate school at UCLA. So I do have that experience of industry and academia. And I've jumped around across a couple of institutions, but landed here at Berkeley about 8 years ago. And as an astronomy professor, most of our work is funded by the National Science Foundation and NASA, and then private philanthropy through various means. And I think at Berkeley, at least, most of our time is spent doing research, and we have a 1-1 teaching load. And as chair, more recently, instead of teaching every semester, I'm starting to do more administrative work to keep the whole department running. And our whole department size is about 120 people altogether. So it can be a big job. So instead of teaching, I spend lots of time doing that kind of administration, which is a whole new experience. And yes, speaking to some of the things we already talked about, the jump between postdoc and faculty is quite large. The jump between faculty and chair is almost equally as large. in terms of new skills, new things you have to learn, more people you have to meet, more emails you have to send, more scheduling and budgets and whatnot. So I would love to go back to my postdoc days and do research all day long. So I fully appreciate the postdoc years in retrospect. I'm sure all postdocs would much rather have a permanent faculty position though. So, and yeah,
I
go
would
ahead.
agree with you about jumping to chair. I remember that first time I had to evaluate other faculty and evaluate staff. I've never done that before in my life. And they didn't teach you how to do that. They just say, okay, there you go. You need to fill in this form. Yeah. I remember that was another big jump. Yeah.
Funnily enough, I learned some of those skills when I was working in industry. At the very end, I started doing some management training. And so a lot of my skills came from that very brief training period in industry, where they're much better about training their managers than we are in academia. And then, yeah, I'll just finish with the last thing. I work on a combination of observational astronomy and theoretical astronomy and experimental astronomy, building hardware as well. So I have a lab here. And so that's quite fun because we get to see all sides of the field. And again, instrumentation is a really unique, interesting area. In physics, there's a lot of experimentalists. In astronomy, there's a very small number of experimentalists. It's less than 10% of astronomers actually work on hardware and technologies anymore. So I think that's quite a different and interesting experience and relates a little bit more to engineering fields. I talk to lots of engineers every day than I think your typical astronomer. And I'm happy to take questions.
A general question for Professor Bruce and Professor Liu. What's your impression that after you graduate, or even after you have done some fellowship, let's say you choose to go to the industry and work for a few years? My impression that it's a plus for getting a faculty position. Is that a fair statement, or it's a negative?
I think very field dependent. So I don't know, but my impressions are in engineering fields, it's much more common and accepted. In astronomy, it's fairly unusual. It kind of depends on what you were going off to do. If you went off and worked in finance or something, making the jump back is a little bit hard.
Isn't that a good skill?
Yeah. If you went off and worked at, in an aeronautics company or something, and you did data science work for a few years, coming back into astronomy is probably not that hard, although you'd have to find someone willing to take a risk on you probably as a postdoc. I think it would be hard to come back straight into a faculty position.
I see.
Bill might have other thoughts.
And like one of the students that one of our explorers, Casey Lam. So after her PhD, she went to a Carnegie Observatory or something like that. So how easy would it be for her to switch back in the teaching track in the future?
So in astronomy, almost all of our PhDs who want to go the academic track, they will go do postdocs. And the postdocs are almost entirely research while they're a postdoc. They're not usually doing much teaching. They might substitute lecture for someone or teach a 1-week summer class or something like that. But it's all research. And so your criteria for judging whether you should get a faculty position or not at a R1 university is predominantly on your research. And if you're trying to get a job at a teaching college after your postdocs, you have to kind of carve out opportunities for teaching. You have to find them. At Berkeley here, we have summer classes, which is a great opportunity for a postdoc to really be the professor of record for a class. So that's kind of what people would do.
Yeah.
Mentally, is there pressure as a postdoc, assuming now you got this 2 years to do research? Is it just like industry? If you don't produce good results, that's not going to be a problem. So, I mean, even though it's wonderful to do research, there's still significant pressure to see whether you do something worthy of trying to get a faculty position.
Yeah, I'd say it's a lot of timing. So it is true. Some people transition into postdoc and immediately have a great result, and they're on a fast track to a faculty position. Some other people, they're switching. They have to learn a new skill set. It takes them a little time. But then they have spectacular results for astronomy. It can be year 4 or 5 of your postdoc. And
Oh.
they still get faculty positions. So there's very much a matter of timing and research and luck, right? So I
Yes,
think
yes,
it's still
yes.
possible. Yeah.
Yeah, in a new field, you just don't know how soon you get something that you really are after. So,
Yeah.
So I have another question. So getting a PhD from an R1 institution like Berkeley, were there a lot of any of your students actually went to, let's say, an R2 or teaching institutions?
So far, so my specific graduate students have so far all gone on to other R1 universities. That's not true. Actually, some went to industry. So I've had
Okay.
two, one's working for Google, worked for Planet Labs right after graduation, and now is working for some other space science labs. So yeah, so industry and academia. I think generally at Berkeley, we have people who go all over. So yes, indeed, we have people who eventually find they love teaching and they really want to teach at a teaching college in the long run, and they can end up there.
Yeah, I think that the transition is the students, graduating students need to understand that, yeah, I love teaching, I want to go teaching, but that cuts away your research time and cut away your research funding and also cuts away your allotted research release time from your institution. So it's to just have to juggle that. It depends on the student. I have known people that actually wants to teach and they said, well, I have enough research or I just do enough research to go on to whatever my job is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think at teaching college, there's still opportunities to do research,
Yeah.
but the way you do research is very different.
Yeah.
I think it's a type of research you're usually working in a field that's less high pressure.
Yeah.
So the research can go at its own pace, and you get to work with undergraduates in research a lot more. Here at Berkeley, for instance, we work with graduate students and postdocs. We work somewhat with undergraduates, but it's very challenging to find the time to really nurture undergraduates in research as I would like to. We still do our best, but I think at a teaching college, you can really invest your time in undergraduate research too.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Okay.
It'd be great to hear from you, Kira.
Yeah. Okay. So, Yakira, you're on.
Hey, thanks. I was like, I do have a question for Jessica and William, but we can get to it afterwards because I'm curious. Yeah, so I guess a little bit about me. So my background, I guess I started in material science and engineering at Northwestern. I really liked my design courses though for my undergrad, which is why then for my PhD I went into mechanical engineering. There was a bit where actually before going to Berkeley or applying to Berkeley, I explored a handful of institutions in Europe. So I graduated in 2018 and took a gap year because I was planning to start somewhere in Germany. But just with the time change and just kind of what fit my research and just like what could work best for me at that time, I ended up coming back to the US and applying for schools there. So I have just some experience exploring programs there and also considering it for faculty, but not as much anymore. So I applied to Berkeley, did my PhD, and I worked with Kosa Goucher Lambert in mechanical engineering. And some of my work is really on, it's called design theory and methodology, or engineering design. And I filed the dissertation August 2024. It was a sprint to get things done from, I guess, just like anybody who's in the PhD or just like has completed it. You think the end will go smoother and then like things wrap up really, really quickly. And I had applied for a handful of postdoc positions or basically between October and December of 2023. And even before applying to that, I was starting to explore postdocs probably around this time, 2023, like essentially just a while before, going through different institutions I would be at, and then of those institutions, who would I want to work with? So I had like a pretty extensive like Excel sheet or Google sheet that had institutions I would consider going to. Okay, who from my field or related field could be my mentor? And then if there wasn't any option, essentially tossed those universities out and then looked at, okay, of these universities, how can I be funded? So sometimes there's internal funding. So in my case, through MIT, there's internal funding that's paying for me for my postdoc, but there's also some external postdoc fellowships. So one of them that I applied to was eFellows through NSF. I ended up getting awarded that and at MIT, but I had to decline NSF just because MIT has kind of strict, you can only hold one and you can't participate in other programs. And that's okay. The MIT one is a cohort experience. Also, each postdoc is not created equal, is like the other insight. The MIT postdoc, we have a weekly seminar throughout the semester, which on one hand is really nice to have that cohort experience. On the other, some people are less excited to have to go to it because it's a requirement. And whereas at least NSF, that was fully remote, the seminars that they had, but it was from students in any kind of engineering across the country. So a lot more variety in institutions and mentorship, whereas MIT is everyone's MIT, and the like most of the professors who come speak are from MIT for those seminars. But then there's fellowship programs that have no element of cohort experience, and it's just like they give you the money and are good luck. So I like another one I considered, especially because everyone's at Berkeley, is it's called PFP, Postdoctoral Fellowship or Presidential Postdoctoral Fellowship Program, PPFP. But it's a pretty good one that's anybody can apply to with not exclusive to engineering. So across the UCs, as long as you find a mentor. I think another key aspect with most postdoc fellowships is finding the mentor ideally beforehand. Most of them require even a mentor letter to be submitted in October when you're submitting these fellowships. So that means if you want someone to agree to work with you and write that letter, you should have already decent connections with them probably by the beginning of the summer, or at least that they know you. So you can ask, and yeah, and then a lot of these fellowship programs, the one at Berkeley, the PF or PPFP, is just like funding directly to you, and there's not an implied faculty offer. There's a faculty incentive if you are a fellow. So that means if you're a PPFP fellow and you apply to another UC, there's a little bit of higher an incentive or some sort of money that can be allocated to pay part of your salary. But in, say, UC Boulder, University of Michigan, Carnegie Mellon, who also have these programs, they tend to award it to you, but you also have to apply for faculty positions, or it kind of comes like, we want you for faculty and then maybe we'll give you this. It's not just a fellowship. Whereas, because I remember applying for one through Carnegie Mellon, and they started asking me like, how serious are you to become faculty here? Like, essentially, yeah, which is a little stressful because I was like, I just want to do research for 2 years. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen next. But it kind of came with more strings attached, which I wasn't ready for, and neither were they. So there's, yeah, postdocs on one hand is nice to do research, but like finding a postdoc and securing it can be really challenging. And sometimes postdocs are just listed like any job listing on a job board. Like, we need a postdoc for X project for X number of years, and you just apply to it, interview, and you get it. So yeah, very convoluted process. But yeah, I'm at MIT now, and like I said, most of my work is still really similar to engineering design, design theory, but I am bridging the topics a bit more into the management domain. So exploring some of those conferences and targeting just more business audiences. So instead of Journal of Mechanical Design, looking at Journal of like Product Innovation Management or Journal of Management, different management journals, and thinking more about how humans and AI within an engineering or design context, how that's changing how we work and manage teams. So not quite on interface side or the technology development, but more on the how that's changing teaming and essentially the future.
Professor Booth had posted a link on the chat about the presidential fellowship, right? Okay.
Yeah, I saw that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
Yakira.
yeah.
So, on average, how many institutions do you apply to to get a pretty secure feeling of being accepted as a postdoc?
I think I can share about my case. It's really dependent. So I guess some other advice I got for the postdoc was choosing an institution that was kind of similar, I guess, competitive level of Berkeley, or like just has a really good mentor. And being at a competitive school like Berkeley means there's not that many other institutions. There's very slim pickings. So like when I narrowed it down, it was really MIT and Carnegie Mellon, just based on institution and just like design work that's happening there. There were some other institutions that had really great work, but I wasn't maybe thrilled to move to, say, Atlanta and Georgia Tech.
Stanford.
Yeah, Stanford,
Yeah.
yes and no. Right now, their design ecosystem in terms of like engineering design is changing a bit. It's been more human-computer interaction lately. And I was a little hesitant to not apply for business schools, to stay within mechanical engineering. Whereas staying in mechanical, I can go into business or mechanical, but I got feedback that if I went into business, mechanical engineering programs might be a little confused as to why I pivoted. But I basically applied to just had two institutions in mind, and for MIT, I applied for this fellowship program as well as the NSF e-fellows and put MIT as my first choice. And then for Carnegie Mellon, I really wanted the PPFP, but it just didn't work out. So instead, the person I was going to work with there, some other fellowship came on his desk and he asked me to apply to it. So I applied in that sense, but that one was even more competitive and I knew my chances were slim and I didn't get it. So, and it's okay, it worked out. But I think looking at how many people get awarded certain fellowships, people can have a decent sense of how competitive they are. Which is why I say the UC one, just they award a lot, like 50 or 70 people just at Berkeley. So your chances are more than, at least like this MIT one, we had 15, but this coming year is only going to be 5 or 6. And like the one at Carnegie Mellon was 2, maybe a third person would be invited. Yeah, and I guess if I didn't get awarded either of them, like any person, the backup plan was to just stay in the PhD a little longer and just not file. Which would have been okay. And honestly, after agreeing to start with MIT, I was pretty stressed to get the dissertation in. Because you have to have filed it before I could start at MIT September 1st. So I remember filing it and they asked for revisions, just formatting, and I was making formatting changes as I was moving cross country, like in hotel rooms. And I know some people in the program were literally working on their dissertation or defending their work like the day before starting.
Wow.
So, like on some hand, knowing you can defer is kind of nice. This one just strictly had a you cannot defer,
Hmm.
but I think people still occasionally did. So,
I have a question for you. When I was listening to you, you mentioned something that is very important about knowing people and having a network and looking for places where you know somebody, finding a mentor or at least somebody that you might want to work with. So have you done, and did you do that beforehand during your years as a graduate student, or it's just that doing so when you're looking, you look for people you might not know and just happen to be might be interested in your research? Do you know all these
yeah.
people beforehand?
The two people I had reached out to work with, yes.
Yeah.
I went to my first like conference. It's
Yeah.
called American Society of Mechanical Engineers, but it's a conference that happens. It's called IDETC, it's specifically design related discipline, but I had gone to that every single year since my first year. So people recognized me and my work over time. And most of these colleagues, I guess, or the professors were like my advisors, colleagues during his PhD program or his postdoc. And just, I guess they were all familiar faces. I think it became more challenging with the postdoc is also most of these fellowship programs require the faculty mentor to be tenured. So it kind of automatically eliminates a lot of assistant professors who I actually probably knew more just because they were younger and it was easier to connect with them. So it was challenging in that sense. I didn't have as many connections with business school faculty. So that was challenging when I was trying to secure one through Berkeley with the PPFP, but ultimately couldn't get a mentor to kind of like agree to work with me. And that's entirely from me not knowing them long enough or them knowing my work. So those felt a little bit more cold email playing.
So I think
Yeah.
one of the point is that graduate students, PhD students, if they have a chance and get funding to go to conferences, that would be a good way of learning and also getting to meet people and establishing your own network that can help you in the future.
Yeah, and I think being open to opportunities, because but I think once again, not all postdocs are created equal, because I had just I was in Canada and met with some professors when I was in Vancouver. And one of those professors then said, hey, we have this postdoc. I think you'd be great. You should really apply for it. But a lot of it ended up being a bit too much curriculum development that wouldn't have allowed me to do as much research. So that one I kind of had to politely decline even applying for. Let me see. Then see some other ones. There was another one that also came up. Oh, through the conferences, people were like, oh, I'm a professor in Australia. Like, I need postdocs. Or like people would just be pretty direct, like, I'm looking for postdocs. Come work with me. And that's kind of a delicate dance of like still being amicable, but I was like, there's zero chance I'm moving to Australia for 1 to 2, 3, I don't know how many years. Yeah, just because I knew I wanted to be on like the Western US more kind of like permanently. So I'm okay to move to the East Coast or anywhere in the US for the postdoc, but not beyond that.
So let me do this. We're at 6:40, but let me ask each one of the panel members one question so that you can answer it, and then we can open it up to students. Each one of you, starting with Yakira, if graduate students come to you, what would be one advice you give them as to how they go on to the next step after they graduate? That's an interview question, by the way.
Oh, and I go first.
Yes.
I think especially I guess if people really are interested in R1 research institutions, to just be patient. And I think like reflecting back to even myself, like I kind of really wanted to know where things were, like, oh, I'll be here and I'll maybe have this job lined up. And here I am. I'm like, I don't have a job lined up, but that's okay. Just like knowing at the end of the day, you have a PhD, you have like, there's all these backup options. Like even your dream institution might not have a job open in for the next couple of years, and that's okay. So just like knowing kind of, I think more what you actually need in the moment and like what you're okay to live with. And if that dream job or the certain thing doesn't happen, it's not the end of the world. It's okay.
And also, you
And
guys,
just patience.
students are still young. You still have plenty of time to go for more than one job. I mean, it's not like in the old days when people have one job and last for a long time. So going from job to job, going to different locations is nothing to be ashamed of. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
and I think I was just gonna say sometimes also when you're finishing the PhD, you really want that faculty job. And like I said, it takes that time with the postdoc, but you'll see friends get kind of like teaching institutions or not, I don't want to say not as competitive, but it's can immediately go into teaching or liberal arts. And there's just that trade-off. So I think knowing certain positions take a little longer, and that's okay.
I understand. Okay, thanks a lot. Professor Booth, what is your advice to the student?
One thing that I would advise people to do is take time to write some sort of personal development plan. The AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, is that this is the do I have that acronym right? This is the organization that publishes science, the Journal of Science. They have a individual development plan portal, a website that is designed for PhD students in the sciences. And I've always found that a very nice exercise to do. I do it with a lot of even undergrads, but grad students. I think it's a way to just sort of force yourself to set aside a little bit of time and ask yourself, what are my desires for long term, for a career? What are my values? What is my need to make a certain level of income? What are my talents? What type of work environment do I want to be in? What personal skills and technical skills do I need to develop to get there? And I think we all spend often, I think most of us spend way too little time setting aside, most of us spend way too little time thinking strategically about what we want to do over the next year or 3 years or 5 years. And I think especially if you've gone from undergraduate to graduate school into a postdoc, it's very easy to sort of follow this very, that's the path that's sort of formulaic and it's been set out. You do your undergraduate degree, you get a graduate degree, you do postdoc, and then a faculty position. And you don't want to end up in a faculty position and realize I don't really want this whole academic thing, right? And I think a lot of people get sort of steered or lulled into that this is the standard path and you should do it. And especially people who are sort of good rule following students kind of go along that path. And so I would advise people look up IDP at the AAAS and take some time, set aside some time to work through something like that, to ask yourself these questions about what do you want out of a career, and how do you go about getting what you want.
Actually, there's one thing that I just thought of. When you say students go through all these degrees, in a bachelor, master, and PhD, postdoc, and then they go into a teaching institution or at least have teaching requirements, and they haven't done that before. So that is not something easy transition to get into. So if students can get some teaching experience or TA experience during the career, that will help a lot.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why we require our students, that's the main reason why we require our students, our PhD students, to be a teaching assistant for at least 2 semesters over the course of 5 years.
Yeah. Wait till they have to stand in front of a class of 65 students by themselves. That will be a different experience. Okay, thank you. Professor Lu?
Yeah, I can't pick one. I think I have 3 different pieces here. One is that's something that's of this time, and that's to network. I think it's a post-COVID skill that I worry has gotten lost. It's too easy now to sit in your office or sit at your home or sit at your coffee shop in front of your laptop and just do your work. And a large part of progressing in any career is meeting people that you might someday work for, learning about their experiences, and getting exposure to all the different paths that your career might take. So get out there and do things in person. That's one thing. I think just general good academic advice is if you want an academic career trajectory or you think you want an academic career trajectory is to find a mentor. Um, Academia, I think, unlike in many types of industry positions, there aren't great manuals and there are so many different ways to get into academic positions. It's very useful to have a mentor who's not your research advisor, who you can go to as a backup to find out how other people are doing things differently than your research advisor might be, what their path looks like. And even just having one mentor who you can go and ask dumb career advice questions of, who doesn't have to, you don't have to worry about their judgment on your research itself, is really, really valuable. And then the last one is good life advice, which is know yourself. And that's often the hardest thing. Think about what you like about your job every day. Is it the problem solving? Is it the being your own boss? Is it the solving technical diving deep into the literature? Is it, thinking esoterically? The more you know about yourself, the more you can say, well, if it's not an academic path, what are the other possibilities, or how important is academia to me relative to other options? Because more than anything, academics sacrifice to have their academic positions. We sacrifice where we want to live. We sacrifice salary. We sacrifice every hour of the day. So there are many things that academics give up to be academics. And so by knowing what you like and what matters to you the most, you can then make an informed decision of whether you're willing to make those sacrifices for academia or not.
But the academic positions a lot of time is much more flexible than, say, a job in industry. So for me personally, that was one of the best thing, that I have flexibility with my family and so on. So, and also don't forget the summer, and there are other things that people can do in the summer and other things. Yeah.
Yep.
Very good advice. So why don't we open up to any question from the few students that we have? Matthew, Nadini, and Sifu. Hey, Sifu.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this great chance. And hi, Yakira. Like, we actually met each other last year in CMU at a workshop. And thank you so much for your advice here. So I do have one question. So I'm actually right now as a rising final year PhD. So I really want to find a faculty position in the future. But I do find time is so limited and everything just pops out right now. And I resonate a lot about what Professor Booth suggested. I have to kind of allocate some time to really think about what's my personal development plan, and then I can kind of do a plan on the high level and then narrow it down so that it can direct me into some specific task. But still, even allocate that specific time for thinking about this high level picture is really, really hard. So I'm actually want to get some suggestion or even useful tools that you might are using right now, so that I can do better in terms of the time audition or time management.
Well, one technique that I have that I have heard, and that works well for me when I use it, which is not as frequently as I should, is to identify what are the things that are really important, put them on your calendar, as time blocks. Think about those as I forget who said this. Some podcaster or blogger or something said, think about those as like the big rocks that you'll put in your glass before you fill up your glass with all the little bits of sand, that are all the little extraneous tasks that you kind of have to do each day. Um, but if you just let yourself, if you wake up in the morning and you start checking your email and you sort of do all the little things that sort of come your way and you just react to them, uh, you can't shove a big rock into a glass after the sand has gotten in there, right? You can pour sand around rocks. Um, but that's, I think that would be one piece of advice is just, think about, even if you can just take 5 minutes, Monday morning or Friday night and think about what do I want to do this coming week? Or even if you're just kind of right now, saying, gosh, I really need to spend an hour and a half thinking strategically about my career. Like, look at your calendar right at the end of this meeting and put an hour and a half block on your calendar for next week. And just, that's the time that you're going to do that. You can shut off your email and just do that, right?
For those big strategic thinking sessions, I really like to do those in transit somewhere when you can't be on your computer or your phone. It's a little harder now because you can be on your phone. But if you've got a commute, you just say, every day on the way to work this week, I'm going to think about what is it that I want out of my career. Or if you're on a plane to a conference or a location, that's a great time to just stop and think and try not to, engage with any screens and just have a piece of paper and jot down ideas for yourself, whatever that big strategic question you're asking about.
Great advice. Let me also add from my own experience is that a counselor once told me, when you wake up in the morning, count out the things that you need to do and kind of figure out which one you can have influence on, which one you can do something about, and which one that you cannot. So there are things that give you pressure in life that you can't do anything about. Okay, not just you ignore it, but you actually give priority to things that you can do. So it's kind of like getting a list and then invert it into a thing that you can do something about and go and do it. I think that when I was a student, we didn't have Google Calendar. I love Google Calendar. I think it's great for doing what Professor Lu said, and Professor Lu said. So, and I still do that by putting in the things that I need to do. So visually, I know there are things that I need to do on certain days, and I'll go and do that. So even in retirement. So I think time management is a very important thing. Yeah. Hi, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I had a quick question about coming up with ideas for grants. So when you start the ideation process, would you say it's more advisable to zone in on our area of expertise or try to come up with ideas that are more interdisciplinary?
I don't think there's one right answer. A little bit depends on the type of researcher that you want to be, and there's room for all types. But I mean, I think it's very hard to be, especially in early career stages, very hard to be successful with a research proposal that's in an area where you don't have any expertise at all. So they are going to look at, can you accomplish what you state? And they want to show, there's almost always someone who says this is a team that's going to be able to do this well, or no, maybe not. I think that's not the whole judgment, but it is certainly some of it. So if it were really out of left field and a totally new idea, there has to be something you can build your foundation on, right? Whether that's, okay, I have the math skills or the engineering skills or something that you can show that you're building and developing on that, even if it's a wild and crazy idea. Over the course of your career, you can start to be a little more free and take more risks and transition from one field to the other. But I think in the beginning, you might have to stick a little bit closer to home. Whether it's interdisciplinary or single focused, that's completely up to you.
And I would just say know your audience, and if you can get any advice from people who know about the particular funding source you're applying for, do that. Some federal funding sources, you need to really, you need to have preliminary results, and you almost feel like you need to have done a fair amount of the work before you even apply to do the work, to get money to do the work. Others, I had a proposal rejected recently and it came back and it was like the main feedback was this was from a philanthropic agency, and that they said this is all great, but it's not risky enough. We're looking for higher risk things, and I was like, oh, like.
Yeah, I have a similar experience, but that actually helped me grow my skin to be thicker. I actually went to visit National Science Foundation headquarters to meet one of the directors by appointment. They have to meet with citizens for half an hour, whatever. So I walk in, make the appointment, flew over there and meet with the guy and start talking about what I would like to do. And the first thing he said was, "We don't fund business school." Bam, right there. I almost fell off my chair. And then, but anyway, he allowed me to talk about this. And then the second thing is that, where's the science in your research? So I was talking about service science and management science. So we didn't get along too well, but somehow I have another contact at NSF through other people, and we grouped together. We actually got the first grant, and then we go on from there. So it taught me a lot of things about being thick-skinned and protect and defend what your ideas are, and that will help. And I never met that guy again. Don't want to meet him.
Yeah, and I think that's wise advice is talk to the program officer if you're applying to federal or philanthropic. Talk to the program officer. They're very happy to talk. 99% of the time, they would love to hear from you. Talk to them before you submit the proposal, like before when you're in the idea stage.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, Nandini, one other thing that I love to do, I don't have ideas on the, off the cuff. I actually just keep a journal of random ideas. Usually when I'm watching somebody's colloquium, I'm like, here's a dumb idea. And I just write it down. And boy, I can't tell you how often I go back to those ideas as, okay, I thought this was dumb, but actually it's not. It's just questioning some foundation. It's really worthwhile. So don't confine it to just proposal season. Think about idea generation all the time, and you never know what's going to come together out of that.
Yeah, I have a lot of yellow stickies around my computer. Somebody said that I'm so old-fashioned. We don't do that, but I still have stickies with ideas all around. I can't get to all of them, but someday I might. So getting ideas like that. Yeah.
I'm curious if it's different in engineering disciplines, Yakira. This interdisciplinary, is that really prized or not?
I can't speak too much about, grant writing that's not in a fellowship sense. So yeah, but I think it really varies, like all of you mentioned, like what type of grant, the institution that's funding it, everything's really different. And then also, I guess your PhD, really lean on your advisor, who should be doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and like guiding you. And if they're not, maybe get somebody else to help show you the ropes. Because I think as a PhD, we think like, oh, we need to do all these things, but there's a lot of hidden knowledge that your advisor, and if not your advisor, somebody else in your field can help you with. I had a question. I know we're at time though, but I did have a question. So I guess if people need to hop off. Yeah, I think both Jessica and Willem, you guys move institutions, correct? Okay.
Yep.
How, did you know you would do that early on? Or like initially, did you have kind of a preferred location, or it just made sense eventually to land back to Berkeley? Or yeah, could you share a little bit about that? Because I think the context I'm coming from, right, for most people, faculty openings at every institution don't happen. So when you go on the market, whatever is on the market is your options. And it can only go down from there.
William, you want to start?
I would say no, I did not plan that, and I would not advise you to plan that. I think going anywhere and saying I don't really want to be here, but I'm going to go there for a while, and then spending 5 years. 5 years is a not insubstantial fraction of your life. It would be hard to start a faculty position and move. If starting one and then moving after a year or 2 years would be so disruptive. So I mean, I feel like wherever you go, you have to go and feel like I'm going to be here. Okay, maybe you don't think I'm going to be there forever, but you're investing the next, at least what I think of as the foreseeable chunk of your life. It's hard to imagine your life maybe beyond 5 years or so. Yeah, I did not plan it. It just happened, and for me, there was a fair amount of a two-body problem. My partner, dual career issues. But it also was just timing that I happened to come to Berkeley. They happened to have an opening, right? I wasn't looking around. Yeah. Jessica?
Yeah, very similar for me. I was at University of Hawaii and I fully intended to stay there and I really enjoyed the position. I had a kid who was growing up into sort of school age, and so we were entering schools in Hawaii, which is a challenge. The public school system there is very challenging. So, that was the one thing I wasn't happy about. And then also Hawaii didn't have an undergraduate astronomy program, so I was missing that a little bit. But otherwise, I loved my institution. But it was more of similar to William. I was going around giving a colloquium, and someone said you should apply for our opening. They really gave me the hard sell. And then actually one of my letter writers was at Berkeley, and the letter writer said, I'll write you a letter, but only if you also apply for the Berkeley position. And then the rest is history. So it wasn't intended.
Also, as part of that answer is that, as I said earlier, your students are still young. If the first job that you apply for on a tenure track might not be the only one, you're going to have many opportunities in the future. And don't forget, there is another block in there is about not getting tenure and moving to somewhere else. So getting into a tenure track is not guaranteed to get tenure. So it's quite a big step. And many people move. I mean, look at the professors here and other places too. So you're not packed to that one job once you get into it. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Wow, we ran out of time. So I do appreciate the professors for coming and Yakira for coming and talk to us and the students to attend this. And I recorded this and I will ask one of our Explorer Guardian of our YouTube to put this on. And I think we have all said the right thing, so we can put it on. But anyway, we do appreciate it and hope to see you again very soon. Thank you.
Please feel free to reach out if you have any
Yes,
questions.
yes.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.